When you think about German battlecruisers, you probably think of the Battle of Jutland, how these ships sank their British counterparts while taking a terrible beating in turn. Ships like Seydlitz or Derflinger struggling into port with extensive damage. And yet, despite that, they survived and would return to service. Maybe not to battle, but at least to service. However, not all the German Grossekreutzer would be so fortunate. One of those ships, in fact the newest one at the time, would not survive. That ship was SMS Lützow, a ship that was only in active service for a couple months. Her career is one of the shortest of any capital ship in any navy. This is not a reflection of any flaws in the ability of her crew. Lutzow simply took too much damage. And more importantly, too much damage in the worst locations. That she held on as long as she did is something to be respected for the strength of the ship and the tenacity of her crew. In today's video, we'll be looking at Lutzow's story, from start to finish. The ship that would become SMS Lützow was laid down on May 15, 1912, in Danzig. Her construction would progress quite quickly at first. Lutzow was launched about a year and a half later on November 29, 1913. This was still peacetime for Germany. However, during the Grossekreuzer's fitting out process, that would change. When the Great War came in August 1914, it slowed down construction. Many German ships would suffer from this, including one I covered recently in the form of Bayern. For Lutzow, this meant she would only be handed over for sea trials on August 8, 1915, with those starting on September 13th. And she would only formally commission in March 1916, specifically on March 20th, 1916. Only a couple months before Jutland and her ultimate end, due in large part to damage to one of her turbines while on sea trials. That happened on October 20th, 1915, and repairs lasted until late January 1916. Not surprising when 43 blades were destroyed or damaged beyond repair in that turbine. This is a shame because Lutzow was a ship full of promise. The second of the Derflinger class, Germany's most powerful battlecruisers. Or at least the most powerful to actually see completion. Let's look at that now, starting with displacement. The Derflingers each had slightly different displacements due to some differences in design between them. I've covered both Derflinger herself and Hindenburg in separate videos, which I'll link in the description. As for Lutzow, she displaced 26,741 tons, with that climbing up to 31,200 when fully loaded. On that displacement, she carried 4 twin turrets in 2 superfiring pairs, one on the bow and one on the stern, with the stern pair carried further apart due to the placement of the ship's turbines. Something similar to contemporary British design with HMS Tiger and the Japanese Kongo class. Those turrets each carried 2 30.5 centimeter or 12-inch guns for a total of 8 barrels. To support those, Lutzow also carried 14 15 centimeter or 5.9-inch guns in superstructure mounted casements, compared to 12 on her sister Derflinger. Continuing on, Lutzow also ditched Derflinger's 88mm tertiary battery, and she carried a lighter anti-aircraft loadout as well. Some sources will cite 8 88mm anti-aircraft guns. Staff, meanwhile, cites Lutzow only having 4. Make of that what you will. Weaponry beyond this point was rounded off by 4 torpedo tubes, one in the bow, one in the stern, and one on either broadside. Now for the armor protection. This came out to 300 millimeters, 11.8 inches on the main belt, with this thinning down to 100 millimeters, 3.9 inches on the bow and stern. The deck, meanwhile, reached between 30 to 80 millimeters, 1.2 to 3.1 inches, depending on location. And that just leaves the speed to finish the design. This is a contentious topic when it comes to German Grossekreutzer. It can vary wildly between sources and depending on how you view their trial speed in relation to actual service speed. For Lutzow, staff cites the following figures: a design speed of 25.5 knots, with a trial speed reaching 26.4. Some sources will go higher, but I'll use staff's figures for this video. This performance came from 79,881 shaft horsepower through 4 shafts. And that finishes off the design. Now we can return to service. As mentioned, Lutzow only joined service at the end of March 1916. It wouldn't take long after this for her to be sent out to battle, or at least the potential for battle. Lutzow would sail into the North Sea on March 31st to escort destroyers home, and then again on April 16th and April 21st, although not much happened here, with the first major action for this ship coming on April 24th, 1916. She would sail with other German battlecruisers for the bombardment of Yarmouth and Lowestoft. Lutzow would perform well enough during this. Her guns fired at targets ashore, while the British returned fire with shore batteries, with one shell coming within 50 meters, 164 feet, of the Grossekreuzer's bow. After finishing this shore bombardment, the Germans engaged the British Harwich force. This had been busy fighting the German light cruisers, and the arrival of the battle cruisers forced a retreat, with HMS Conquest suffering serious damage in the process. Lutzow didn't see any damage at all, but SMS Seydlitz struck a mine early in the operation and had to return home before getting far into the North Sea. With the conclusion of that operation, Lutzow spent May of 1916 closer to home, on trials, training, and the odd sortie into the North Sea to escort airships or try and counter British moves. Specifically on May 4th, a reported operation against Tonder. During this process, Lutzow underwent a measured mile speed trial. The mean speed was calculated as 27.9 knots in shallow water, with staff quoting the report saying, "In deeper water, far higher results could be expected." This is, incidentally, where you often see much higher speeds claimed for German Grossekreutzer than the official stats. Take what you will from that. Regardless, these trials and patrols came to an end with the end of May. On May 31st, 1916, the High Seas Fleet set sail for the Battle of Jutland. Lutzow served as Admiral Franz von Hipper's flagship for this action, as the fleet set sail, for what was, as it turned out, the last time for Lutzow. Operating as Hipper's flagship, the battlecruiser led her counterparts into battle. The first action came around 4 p.m. on May 31st, or 3 p.m. depending on the source you're using. I'm using 4 p.m. or 1600 military time here. Regardless, at this point, the Germans under Hipper encountered the British battlecruisers under Beatty. For the purposes of this video, I'll be focusing almost entirely on Lutzow. Jutland has received a lot of coverage over the years, so I prefer, in any ships involved in the battle, to focus on the video topic. With that disclaimer done, let's get into it. In the following action, the Germans opened fire first. Lutzow opened the action, firing on HMS Lion around 4:48. In turn, the British fired on Lutzow from both Lion and Princess Royal. However, the firing line beyond that point fell apart. Queen Mary was supposed to fire on Derfflinger, but instead she focused on Seydlitz, leaving Derfflinger unengaged for around 10 minutes. As for Lutzow, she managed to land 2 hits on Lion within a few minutes of opening fire, demonstrating superb accuracy on the part of her gunners. This came with Lutzow's 4th salvo, according to staff, or the 5th, according to Nick Jellicoe. Those 2 hits did relatively minimal damage. The 3rd hit, on the other hand, very nearly sank HMS Lion, because that shell is the one that punched through the roof of her Q turret. Had it not been for the heroic effort of one Major Francis Harvey, Lion might have gone up then and there. However, Harvey managed to order the magazine flooded in spite of losing both legs, and that prevented a magazine explosion. Harvey would be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for this action. HMS Lion would ultimately shear away after taking 6 hits. Lutzow, meanwhile, took 3 hits in this part of the action. None of those were fatal, but that would change, because 2 of those hits were to the forecastle and created a large hole in the upper deck. This might have seemed fairly minor. It wasn't a serious hit, it caused no major damage, and it didn't impact her fighting ability. As we'll see, however, those holes would be a major issue later. While Lion moved off, fire shifted to Princess Royal, with Princess Royal returning fire, landing 2 hits. One hit the armor belt and didn't penetrate. Another hit the forward dressing station, causing severe casualties in that area. Lutzow would end up losing 2 of her doctors during the battle, with a 3rd wounded. Meanwhile, the first British battlecruiser was lost. HMS Indefatigable was sunk by fire from SMS Vonderton, while Lutzow landed a few more hits on Lion, coming out to 9 shells in all, although 4 were duds. Soon after this, around 5:30, HMS Queen Mary blew apart. She had been focused by Seydlitz and Derfflinger and suffered for it. However, as the British battlecruisers pulled away, the 5th Battle Squadron pulled into view. The 4 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships joined the fray, while British and German torpedo boats attempted to torpedo their enemy. Those missed, while Lutzow landed a few more hits on HMS Lion. It was around this time, though, that the ship's luck began to run out. With the battleships in range now, the Queen Elizabeth showed their worth. Lutzow would suffer 4 hits from 15-inch shells. The most notable damage in this portion came with the destruction of her wireless equipment. To add insult to injury, a 13.5-inch shell from Princess Royal also hit near the conning tower around 6:45. As the battle continued to rage on, around 7:15, the Germans spotted HMS Defense and HMS Warrior, which had been pounding the light cruiser Wiesbaden. Lutzow and the other Grossekreutzer opened fire, sending Defense down in short order. Around this point, Lion landed a couple hits on Lutzow. Not particularly damaging ones, but it was starting to add up. Even as Lutzow put her secondary battery to work, driving off 2 British destroyers, Onslow and Acosta. During this phase of the battle, the British 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron had joined the fray. This is mostly relevant for some excellent gunnery by HMS Invincible. The first British battlecruiser faced off with the newest German one, and she would land what is commonly accepted as the fatal blows. Between Invincible and Inflexible, Lutzow was hit 8 times between 7:25 and 7:34 p.m. Two 12-inch shells cut through one of her broadside torpedo rooms, and 2 more hit the bow torpedo room. These hits caused severe flooding, which only grew worse as those earlier forecastle hits began to let water in. Of course, Lutzow might have gotten her revenge. She and Dareflinger fired on Invincible in turn, with a shell penetrating a turret and blowing the British ship apart. Not that it would be enough to make up for Lutzow's damage. Around 7:45, Hipper was taken off the ship by the torpedo boat G-39. Lutzow was ordered to pull back and attempt to return home, as it was clear she wasn't combat capable. Unfortunately for the Germans, the ship took more fire while retreating. HMS Monarch and HMS Orion hit Lutzow 6 more times, knocking out a turret and damaging another, in addition to just putting more holes in an already battered ship. Eventually, the flooding became too much to handle. Lutzow tried to limp home, but the ship eventually had water all the way up to her forward turret. Her screws came out of the water at some points, so the order to abandon ship was given at 2:20 a.m. on June 1st, 1916. By 2:45, water had reached the bridge. Her escorting destroyers put 2 torpedoes into the ship, sending Lutzow to the bottom. While exact figures are impossible to know for sure, it's commonly accepted that she took either 24 or 25 heavy shell hits. Lutzow lost 115 of her crew, with another 50 wounded, and thus ends the story of Germany's only battlecruiser lost to direct combat. Lutzow fought hard, but in the end, she just suffered hits in the worst possible locations. Her crew fought to the end, but they couldn't save their ship. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.